Welcome to Colonial Electric's podcast, The Current, Grounded in Tradition. I'm Jamie Tracy, and today we have with us Travis Katsky, longtime owner and executive chairman, and former vice president Al Visconti.
So, welcome, gentlemen.
Thanks, Jamie.
Thanks for having me.
So, the reason why we started this podcast is because we really wanted to get to know what the company was like before, what we have right now. Travis came to me a few months ago, and, we've really grown as a really big company, but we wanted to know, what was the beginnings like? Who were the people that made the company what it is today? So we'll be doing this podcast once a quarter, and we'll be interviewing different people that made a big difference in who we are. So today our lucky guest is Al. He came for the Christmas party this year, and it's just going to be a really, really good time we're going to have with him. So let's begin.
Thanks, Jamie. And I'd like to say a couple little things. And this is our Christmas party at the Pole Barn Day, and I know everyone looks forward to that. And I do a speech and all that kind of good stuff, and I look forward to doing that. With that said, my speech today is based on legacy, and I know I can't think of a better way to talk about legacy than to have the people who built Colonial and made it what it is today. Mm-hmm. And that goes into I learned so much from these people that made me what I am and made the company what it is. And with that said, I'm hoping that the younger crowd that watches this and the guys and girls that are coming up through Colonial now can take a little bit of this from myself and from everyone we interview, Al being first, to be able to understand what it took to build Colonial and the people that made it happen. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to lose that legacy. And I can't say this is my idea. There's a podcast called Millhouse Podcast. Everyone knows I'm a big fisherman, love fishing, fly fishing especially. And it's called Millhouse Podcast. And what that's about is an ex-Olympic skier, Andy Mills. He became a huge tarpon fisherman in the Florida Keys. And upon him doing that, he did it for 25, 30 years. And he realized that a lot of these guides and anglers in the Florida Keys that were great fishermen, had this legacy built and made the fishing what it is down there, were all going away. They're retiring, some dying, what have you. And he didn't want to lose those stories and just what made that. Mm-hmm. And I said, gosh, we kind of have the same thing going on here. Like people retiring. My dad passed away 13 years ago. I'd love to interview him. Mm-hmm. Can't do that.
Right.
But this is a great way to preserve the tradition and the legacy of Colonial Electric.
So we're going to start out just finding out who is Al. Yeah. So first question is, where were you born and raised?
Well, I was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Okay.
Hence, I'm a Steelers fan.
Steelers fan. I knew that was coming.
I got a little story about that we'll talk about later on. But my dad was a salesman by trade. He went to Carnegie Mellon, Pittsburgh, graduated. Mm-hmm. Went to serve time in the military. Mm-hmm. He was over there in World War II, came back, met my mom, and got married, and I was born in 1952.
Okay.
At that time, like I said, he was a salesman, and he traveled wherever the work was. Mm-hmm. We left Pittsburgh, went to Syracuse. Mm-hmm. From Syracuse, we moved down to Charleston, West Virginia. That's when my brother was born. From there, we moved to Richmond. He was a car salesman at that time. He worked for Hoover Vacuum Cleaner prior to that, a couple others there. And then from Richmond, we moved back to Pittsburgh.
So you got a lot of East Coast experience. You've seen a lot of it over here.
I learned. I didn't know all that.
Yeah.
I moved all that much places.
My brother and I were a lot closer than we were as we got older. Mm-hmm. And because we traveled so much, you didn't make friends.
Right.
We traveled at that time. We were in Bethel. We lived in Bethel Park, right outside Pittsburgh. And he was traveling down here to work. He'd leave on Mondays, come back Fridays. That was a big thing. We'd go to the airport to drop him off and go to the airport to pick him up. Yeah. He said, my mom was getting a little frustrated. Excuse me. And she said, we got to do something about it. He said, you're not going to believe this. I bought a lot down in Cloverfields on Eastern Shore.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Well, we went down there to look at it. And we came down here, I forget what year it was. It was one of the worst blizzards that they had around in the 60s. Uh-huh. And we came down, and we went across the Bay Bridge right before they shut it down. So it was moving. That's when the bay was frozen.
Yeah,
the first
freeze, yeah.
Oh my gosh.
So came back later after about 4 or 5 months later in the spring came back and we went to the clover fields and there was no roads. They just cut the grass where the road was shorter.
Oh my gosh.
So we came back over here and we drove around and they found a place at Colonial Estates up on Route 2. And
Okay, and that's how you ended up over here.
That's how we ended up there.
Okay,
They started the house and we moved here in 1962.
okay.
They had just finished Parole Plaza at that time.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
So
That
you've
was a
you've
grand
really
opening.
seen
She
a.
doesn't remember Parole
No,
Plaza.
no.
She's too
Oh.
young.
I mean, but you've really.
The sign's still up there. They have the old sign.
Yeah, so you've really like seen how much this area has grown,
Oh, yeah,
like
yeah.
exponentially, I'm sure.
At that time, which Travis's dad, Butch, and his mom, and I guess you lived there too. You were born
In Gingerville.
Gingerville.
I was born in Tracy's, but
Oh, okay.
we moved there when we were like, I was 1.
Okay.
I was young.
So yeah, Gingerville wasn't even there. They had just started, you know, the development going down Route
Yeah.
2 towards South County.
Oh my gosh.
South County was a haul.
Yeah.
Calvert County was 2.5 hours to get there.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Probably
down
dirt roads,
to-
right?
So there
was
was-
it dirt roads once you got into like Calvert County?
Well, no, they were chip, what do they call it, gravel and chip,
Oh, okay.
chip and tar,
Yep.
tar and
Okay.
chip roads. And
So still not
yeah,
like the
it was,
roads
it
we
was
have
a,
now.
it was a drive.
Wow, wow. How did you decide to become an electrician?
I worked for a friend of mine, his father, John Krause. We kind of grew up together. He lived over on Fairfax Road. We lived in Colonial Estates. You could go through the woods at the headwaters of Church Creek to get back and forth. And also a young man named Ronnie Gardner. His dad was E.L. Gardner Concrete. And I worked for Annapolis Electric during the summer times. And then when I started community college, I'd work days that I was off from school. From school I'd work there, and then summer of 1970 I graduated. I worked there, and I just wasn't getting anywhere. It was a small company, and it was just a one-man operation. Really, it was his dad. It was John's dad.
So you were working, you did it during the summer when you
Did it
went to
during the
school.
summer, yeah.
And then part-time when you were in college.
holidays, yeah.
Gotcha.
And I did that. I did 2 years of college, wasted my time.
Yeah.
I really didn't, it wasn't that I couldn't do it. I didn't want to do it.
Yeah.
And I learned to like the trade, electrical work, because you did everything. One thing I learned in the beginning, electricians do it all.
Yeah.
I knew how to take up flooring, tongue and groove flooring. That's where the tongue sticks into the groove.
Right.
You have to be very careful taking that apart and putting it back together.
Right.
So you learn everything. And it made it like it wasn't an everyday of just pulling wire, making splashes, things like that.
Okay, so what challenges did you face in your way to becoming a master electrician? I'm sure there's-
Challenges, I don't call them challenges. I call them learning experiences. That was one thing that, and I always instilled this on the guys that work with me, I don't like saying for me, but with me, and they were learning. And it kind of, I'm sure we'll get into that a little later. I was big on VOTEC. But the main thing is getting them interested. You got to make it fun. And school's the same way. If it was fun, you liked it. If it wasn't, you didn't.
Right, right.
So
You got to do something what you're interested in.
exactly.
Yeah.
And the teachers back then, it was a different time. There's no doubt. They would pick that up and they would, work towards that. For me, it was one thing. For somebody else, I was ADD myself, but they didn't call it that back then.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
was a class clown.
Yeah, yeah. I can imagine that.
Imagine that.
I know.
I cannot see that. Can you?
Where does that come from?
But you brought up a good point, Al. You said you had to make it fun.
Yeah.
And you kind of went off on a tangent about like school with it, but you're talking about really electrical. Like, when you're out there on a job, if you want to keep a young person interested, you can't just go pull the wire from there to there and do it.
Right.
That's not. I mean,
Yeah.
and work's not always fun, but I echo that because coming up through the trade, I worked under several people that are here, including Al, and they always made it fun. I'll tell a quick story. When I was out on the job with JR, when Al was the boss and JR was the foreman, and I was the guy picking up the trash per se, and JR would make it fun. We had wire nut fights where you stick them in PVC and blow each other. If we didn't get a certain part of the house done in a certain amount of time, he'd make us run laps.
Oh my God.
It was a competition.
Who were some of your inspirations at that time?
I'll tell you, there was the one inspiration before I came here was Ricky McCullough's father, Richard. I went to work for him. He was a little one-man operation. You know, I went there, he said, but I've got to tell you, you're going to have to work every minute of every day because the type of work we're doing mandates it. I said, I'm ready to work. I said, I have experience.
How old were you at that time, Al?
It was right before we got married. I was probably 19.
Okay.
You know, it was after I was out of school a year because I graduated. I turned 18 the year I graduated.
Okay.
Anyway, you know, I was working there, and I told him another thing is I'm getting married. He said, not a problem. I said, well, I'm going to be taking off. He said, not a problem.
Yeah.
So we worked, and the first day out, we worked 10 and a half hours. We were doing add-on air conditioning,
Oh my gosh.
wiring.
Okay.
And there was a contractor called Medallion Industries. And what they would do, when they were building all the new developments that were starting to develop, like up in Odenton was Four Seasons, air conditioning was an option.
No kidding.
Oh yeah, air conditioning was an option. So what this fellow Lloyd did is he went directly to GE, and he was buying direct from GE and installing them. And he hired guys that could do air conditioners. We would do 10 to 12 unit connections a day.
Dang.
So it got so busy, there was another gentleman that worked there. His name was Cotton Kirby.
I remember that name.
Cotton came to work here for a while after I left, but and actually J.R. Hall's dad, I was his helper. He was an inspiration for me too, he really was, because when the call came from Colonial, they called me up, the general superintendent called me up, said,
Who was the general superintendent at that time?
Andy Doyle.
Andy Doyle.
And Bob Gibbons, they
And Bob,
they
yep.
had two at the
Yep.
time. Andy was kind of, Colonial had started to get into commercial work. They were a residential builder, or being an electrical contractor. They did a lot of work for Lebanon homes.
What year do you think that was, Al?
Well, it was 1970 actually.
So 70s when Colonial was started,
Yeah,
first opened.
I got the call. No, I left. I take that back. I left Annapolis Electric and went to work for McCullough. So it was probably 75.
Yep.
I got the call because that was the year I started.
Right.
And they said they were looking for electricians, start a new division.
Yeah.
And I came highly recommended by Cotton Kirby. He was working for Colonial at that time.
Oh wow.
And I went in, did the interview, and they hired me. And
Wait, hold on. That's not the story.
no. Well,
That's not the full story there.
Story goes
Yeah,
back
you got to go back to
1970.
that.
Okay. Yeah.
Exactly.
That was
yeah.
going to be my next question. How you got like connected
Before
with?
I went to work for, it was when I quit Annapolis Electric. Before I went to work for McCullough, I went down on West Street. That's where the company was.
Right behind the McDonald's.
19B,
Yeah.
West Street. And I went in and I was talking to somebody about getting an application. And in comes this gentleman and he's looking at me. And he says, can I help you? I said, well, I'm talking to the young lady here getting an application. He says, don't waste your time. I said, why's that? But I don't hire people with long hair. I had
Did you have long hair?
under my shoulders.
Oh my gosh.
And I said, you're lost, buddy.
Yeah.
And who was that person that said that?
It was Butch.
With Butch
It was
Kotsky. I had a
Butch,
feeling.
And I knew Butch from softball because
Okay.
we played softball prior to that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Colonial
Yeah, I didn't know you
Electric
knew him
always
before
had a
that. Okay, I didn't
Oh, wow.
realize that.
team. Yeah.
Did
I
you
mean,
guys-
I knew who he was.
Yeah.
He kind of, that's why I kept looking at him. I'm
Oh,
guessing.
Familiar.
You guys, recognized each
So
other.
anyway,
Yeah.
fast forward to 1975, and I was working for McCullough. I was happy, married, had one child, but when they called me up, they said, "Look, we're starting this job up at Crownsville Hospital, and it's a scale job." And I talked to Andy, and I said, "Andy, I was here once before." And the gentleman told me he didn't hire me. Well, I had my hair cut then.
Yeah.
Still a little long, but it wasn't as long as it was. He said, don't worry, I'll take care of it. It was Butch, right? I said, yeah. Don't worry, I'll take care of it.
And ever since then.
Ever since, I was working on the job and it got to the end and the job was in a little bit of trouble. The superintendent wasn't keeping on top of things.
Who was the superintendent? Do you remember who that was?
Eddie Oliver.
Eddie Oliver. Is that Oliver Electric?
That's his cousin.
Okay.
He used to work at Rexel, that guy.
Yeah.
Right, Bobby Oliver.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you can tell as we're talking, you'll hear these names of these different people that either had companies or worked for this company, and it all just becomes a full circle.
Yeah,
It just really
yeah,
does.
yeah.
There were feeder companies that fed the trade in the area. Colonial was one of the biggest feeders. People would work, they'd learn, and they would say, "Man, I can do this."
And branch out.
And it wasn't a lot, but it was.
It was a good amount.
No, it was
I watched it through the years.
Boston Duckett was kind of our.
Well, Boston Duck was kind of the big guy,
Yeah.
and Colonial. This is from my point of view, of course.
Yes.
But, and Colonial was kind of here, and they were like, you wanted to be Boston Duckett. Like,
Right,
that's who
right,
you wanted to be.
right.
Well, go back a little bit. Colonial Electric was the big guy when they were doing
The resi stuff.
the
Residential,
residential stuff.
yeah.
I mean, and actually, I don't know if a lot of people know this, but Butch and Joanne started that company. And Joanne worked. When Butch was out roughing in houses, she was at home backing the screws out of plugs. This is a true story.
Yeah, it's a true story.
Because they came screwed in from the factory.
Right.
Well, Butch started pieceworking, and he would do what they called house packs. For the rough end, he would cut, if they did the estimate and it took 125 foot of a certain size wire, he would cut it at 125 foot, not 125, 1 inch.
Probably
Right,
124
right on the
and
dot.
9 inches.
He
So, you lost it. You lost
said
it.
you don't have a wire stretcher? That was a big thing. Go get me a wire stretcher. Of course, the apprentice would run down and say, "Come on back."
Yeah.
But anyway, they did that, and Joanne would do the billing, and then on weekends, she would go out and lay the plugs out and put the plates on while Butch was doing the.
Right.
Butch was the company, and Joanne was the company.
Yeah, and she set the foundation so that
Yeah.
we're able to,
Yeah.
grow into what we are. Yeah, that
So-
woman is a workhorse. I know
And-
that much.
And Clayton, my granddad, would collect the money.
Yeah.
Yeah, had to keep the boat going.
Yes, exactly.
So, but yeah, finally when, I started, I got there, and Butch came out on the job one day, and he was walking around, and I got that same look.
Yeah.
And he comes up to me and he says, "I know you." I said, "You should.
Yeah.
I was in here 5 years ago. You wouldn't hire me because I had long hair." And he looked at me and real quick. He says, "Got a cut too, didn't you?"
That sounds like him. That's for sure.
And he said, "Look, we're getting rid of Eddie." Well, what they did is they moved him to another job. And Butch kind of had the idea like Travis. Travis, the one thing he said that I will always remember, one of the things, I don't fire people, they'll fire themselves.
It still says it.
You know,
How it works.
Still says it.
So what they did is they moved him to another job, and I took over the job. And one thing that was said to me by Butch, kind of, see if you can't help us out on this. But his dad said, "Don't lose any more of my, damn money."
Yeah.
And I said, "I'll do the best I can, sir." And he looked at me and said, "Do that."
Yeah. You will.
I can hear him
We
now.
got out of there, and the job wasn't a moneymaker, but it didn't lose as much as they had figured that they were going to be in there for.
Right.
So at that point, went to work one day. I went into the office to see where I was going. And Butch said, "Come on in here. I want to talk to you." I said, "Okay." So we go in there, and he says, "I want you to go around to these jobs and find out where the problems are and fix them before they happen, or fix them because they have happened."
Right.
So I said, "Okay," and I had worked on a job prior to that. It was the sailboat bank at Annapolis. I kind of would leave the job and go down there and do things because it was a slow moving project. And then I finished it up and, did a nice job, I thought, and they congratulated, said, "You did a good job." And that's when he said, "I want you to fix things."
Yeah.
They gave me, there was 2 helpers that came. The first one was the guy named Jim Besley.
Good old
I know
Bez.
Jim. Yep.
Yeah, he came up on the job. He had a shadow. And I said, "Can I help you, sir?" He says, "I'm not. I'm from the high school."
Did Bez do the belting?
Yeah. And, excuse me. I said, "We got to do some work here. Here's what we're going to do." He says, "Well, I want to tell you, I haven't done commercial work." I said, "Don't worry. The only difference is there's conduit around the wire. Most of it, we did the wiring and they poured the concrete around and it was done." Then I got a fellow by the name of John Mason. John Mason became my helper. And then when Butch came to me and said, I want you to do this, I said, I can do it, but I need a good helper that I can trust. He said, who's that? I said, John Mason. He said, who's he? I said, the curly, bushy hair comes in every payday on the Oh, yeah.
Oh, that guy, yeah.
I remember him. So he said, yeah. And we went around to just about every job, and we would do things that guys had never done, couldn't do it, had to fix it.
So how long were you in that role?
Probably,
You never left that role, it doesn't seem like,
Yeah.
really.
yeah, I didn't leave the role. The only thing is that it was when, Andy retired.
How much older was Andy than you?
Oh, well, Joe was my age, so I guess Andy was, I was 18, he was probably 40.
Oh, was he that old? Okay.
Yeah, yeah. You know, did that, and it kind of, one day, I heard that Bob Gibbons was gonna start his own company. And I went to the shop, you know, because you drove the truck in.
And what was Bob Gibbons was like the general manager at the time, would you say?
He was well, general superintendent of the residential.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, they were still doing residential, wasn't, not Levitt, they had just started USO.
Yep, yep.
Yeah, so Bob was the general superintendent of the residential, which was starting to grow again. But we didn't give up on commercial. We were doing commercial jobs, did a lot of high profile. Did City Hall in Annapolis, things
Oh,
like
wow.
that. And when Bob finally left, I came in, dropped my truck off, and Butch was out there. He said, come here, I want to tell you something. I said, yes, well, what's up? He says, starting Monday, you're in the office. I said, what?
Where did this come from? Yeah.
He says, yeah, I need you in the office.
Uh-huh.
I said, okay. I said, so what's it mean? I'm done working with your tools? He says, well, maybe.
Yeah. We'll see.
You know,
We'll see
'cause
where
back then, there was no such thing as a non-working superintendent.
Right.
And back then, we were called superintendents. However, Butch, Travis's dad, said, most of these guys are not what I call superintendents when I was in the field. I said, look, I agree with you, Butch. He says, well, we're gonna start saying that they're foreman. I said, okay, it's just a title.
Yeah.
But he was right. I mean, and as time went on, it got worse. And it wasn't, that was always the discussions when you go to the meetings, like the Master Electricians Association or something like that, or one of those things. And they knew it. Everybody knew it, but there was nothing that they said that, you know, there was no apprenticeship other than the union. Then ABC started. That brought it on a little bit. Colonial was a big participant in ABC. At one time, the majority of the yearly graduates were Colonial Electric
Oh,
people.
wow. Wow. That's
Travis
incredible.
went there.
Yep, I did.
That's
He was
incredible.
he did his apprentice
Yeah.
time. Still, there was that gap between graduating high school or quitting school and going on. I got a call one day, and I picked up the phone and I said, "Hello." He says, "Yeah, Albert." I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Dick Perrette, your old phys ed teacher. How you doing?" I said, "Mr. Perrette." "Oh, stop it right there. My name is Dick Perrette now. You're a businessman. I've checked you out.
Yeah.
I understand you work in a Colonial. You're the general superintendent, or whatever they call it. I said general manager or works, whatever."
Right.
He says, and they had the North County VOTEC, but they had nothing down here. And they wanted to start pushing it. And they were going to do it at South River, and then they had South River High School and the middle school, but they didn't have the VOTEC thing there yet. So they were going to borrow space from both. And I talked to Travis's dad. I said, "Look, I think it's going to help everybody if we get involved with that." He said, "Just take care of it. Do it. Do whatever, because we're going to need people. Everybody, you're going to need people."
Right. Absolutely.
So Mr. Perrette did, and I can't remember the lady's name, the principal of South River High School. I never saw such a dedicated person as her. She was probably one of the biggest forces of getting South County or Southern VOTEC down at
Right.
South
Wow.
River.
Wow.
Yep.
That's interesting.
That is interesting.
And Dick Perrette was very big in it too. Because he asked me, he says, "Did you go to college?" I said, "Yeah, I went 2 years, but I didn't get a degree. I learned more about the world, what it's really like to be in, out in the
Out in getting that
the
experience.
job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, me and you in the same. I did the same. I did my 2 years, and I was like, you know what? I don't think this is for me right
Yeah,
now.
I mean, one of the things that really got me straight is I went to Annapolis in my 10th grade. I got in a little altercation with a guy, and I was sent down to the office. And, I figured, they're going to call home. My mom's going to come get me. Well, let me tell you the shock when the door opened, and it was my father.
Oh my gosh.
I just kind of snapped
no.
to attention. And I said, he said, "Don't say a word, get in the car."
Oh my gosh.
And as I was walking out the door, I heard my dad tell the principal, "He's out of here, he's done."
Yeah.
Well, I had taken a test, an entrance test to go to Severn. And I figured nothing would come of it. He made a call, and I started that Monday.
Oh
In the middle of
wow.
my 10th
Yeah.
grade. And that was an eye-awakening. It was a boys' school, no females,
Right.
small classes. I think my graduating class was 25.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Wow. That's tiny.
And, if you acted up and the teacher was walking by, you'd get an elbow
Yeah,
in the ribs.
yeah,
I mean, back then it wasn't corporal punishment. If you got in an argument or a fight, they'd take you down to the gym and strap the gloves on, and you wailed on one another till
It's called discipline.
Yeah.
yeah,
Absolutely.
exactly.
Severn school, as in the
Yep.
Catholic school. Okay.
Not
got it.
No, it's Catholic.
Private.
It's just a private.
Private
It used to
school,
be-
okay.
It used to be the Naval Academy Preparatory School.
Okay. Okay.
I went there for 2.5 years. And one of the most humbling experiences there was when you were a junior, you had to wait tables for lunch.
Oh wow.
Oh man, I don't want to tell you how many times the seniors would take a glass of water, put it over a card and pull it out, and you'd go there. What do I do with this? They
Yeah.
said just slide it off on the floor and
Yeah.
go get a mop.
Oh my gosh.
And you got the brunt of all the
Yeah.
seniors.
I'm sure it
Yeah.
makes you tougher.
But I was humbled.
Yeah.
And I learned a lot about what it is to survive. And,
Right.
keep your mouth shut, listen,
Right.
learn.
Right.
Well, you said you learned that?
You know what? And I said, I had a talk with Danny this morning. I said, "That grumpy face, you keep that going. You keep that
gosh.
going, you're going to have heart trouble."
Yeah.
He says, "I remember riding around with you when I first came to apply for the job. You told me, don't hold anything in."
That's a good point too.
That's,
So that speaking of fun, I did want to mention, we have both the Visconti boys here. So I wanted to know, what was it like, teaching them and raising the Visconti boys with
Well-
Jackie? I have to ask because
it was challenging at times.
yeah, sure.
I mean, David, unless he had something in his hands that he could do something with, and when I say that, like when we built the house, the Harwood house, we built that ourselves. And, I'd go down there and do work, and Jackie would come down, she'd help me, she'd clean up. He'd be down, he'd take wood out in the woods, and he'd be building things, little forts, things like that, build a golf course.
Yeah. Yeah.
Travis had one of those too, by the way.
I did.
But he just needed to have something to keep him occupied.
Yeah.
As long as he did that. He had a little life-changing experience too when he was working at Colonial at the time. He called me up. He says, "Dad, I think I'm going fishing today." I said, "Dave, I know you're fired." And he said, "You're kidding me?" I said, "No, you're done."
Yeah.
I hung up.
Oh my gosh.
Got a call about 25 minutes later, and Jackie calls me, and she's crying. I said, "What's wrong?" She said, "David enlisted in the Navy."
Oh, thank God.
He made it through 4 years.
Uh-huh.
He was going to do, believe it or not, he was going to go to OCS. We got a little incident down in Tijuana, fighting,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that killed that. But he graduated as E5. They wanted him to come back and sign, and they guaranteed him after the second year, they'd make him, he'd be an E7 by then.
Wow. Yeah.
He said, "I'm done."
Yeah.
He said,
did my
I
time.
got the message. He drove home and he come back to work then.
He came back
I
to
think
work in Sight for a little bit.
Yeah.
And he left here and went to Rexel.
Rexel.
No. Yeah. Or
Rexel,
went
then he
to,
left Rexel and went to that lighting company where
Yes.
that came in here to sell to us. So he worked there until the last time, and he's here now.
Yeah. Well, we love having him. I've always been interested because I've known Daniel for like 6 years now.
Yeah.
He's spunky, a lot of fun. I was like, I know, I've heard the stories of the brother. Now I need to meet him. And the two of them, I'm not kidding, they are hysterical. Like,
Well,
I mean, and that speaks to what you're saying about having fun in
Yeah.
life. Like, you know what? Like, they live it every day to the fullest.
Sure.
Every single day, every second. Those guys do. So
well, they weren't really close at growing up because there's 9 years
there's a
difference.
big difference, right?
Which was good. David did all his little league football and all that. He was ready for kids, had his car. Daniel was born, well, not then, I mean, as they grew up at that time. And Daniel was, you know,
He went out in the field and did fire alarm
yeah, he did fire alarm and he picked up real quick.
for several years.
Yeah, he did the fire alarm, telephone, and all the low voltage stuff. It was before we had the low voltage
Yeah.
division.
Before we had
Right,
it.
right.
That's exactly
Yeah, I
right.
remember him mentioning that
Yeah.
to me. And then we have to speak about Miss Jackie, of course. We
Yeah.
all love her so much. She is such a joy to have around. I mean, how are you guys loving retired life and getting to hang out?
Yeah, we do. We love that. We've had our scares. She's
Of course,
fought both lung and breast cancer,
Right.
and she's clean now.
Thank God.
That's great.
Yeah, that's
Thank
good.
God, yeah.
I've had to do some things that I never thought I'd had to do. I had to do her injections
Right.
and everything, and I'll be honest with you, I prayed a lot every day. So
I bet.
I lost my mom a month before we got married.
Oh my
to lung
gosh.
cancer.
I'm so
So-
sorry, yeah.
Yeah, that was all I could remember.
Right.
So-
Well, you know what though, like I'm sure your mom is here with you, especially dealing with, whatever
Sure.
Jackie's going through, and she's keeping you guys going, and clearly, all that praying did something.
Oh yeah,
It did
there's no
something.
doubt.
So,
So
we're so
she's enjoying it.
good. Yeah.
But Al's bored.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You looking for more to do?
See, his sons don't fall from the tree, right? The apple, he's
am,
got to be doing something.
Yeah,
He's got
yeah.
his hands.
You know, I like what I'm doing now.
Uh-huh.
I have a couple clients. I have one major client, Clyde. Yeah. I forget the name of his company, but I do a lot of work for him still.
And Clyde's an engineer.
Engineer, mechanical, electrical, plumbing by trade. To tell you that. But I told him, I met him down there, and I said, Clyde, look, don't take this the wrong way, but I think you're doing your calculations
I remember this.
different than most people do. And he says, you think they're wrong? I said, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I work for Clyde.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do the work. He calls me up. He's got a job. He says, let me know what the problems are you see on this. And I review the plans, and I tell him. He called me at one time, and he says, how about if I send you all the information and you do the design drawings? I said, not a shot.
Yeah.
I said, not that I can't do it. I don't want to be tied down.
Right. Right. Well,
I
exactly.
think, and I told him, I said, Clyde, you know what it is now. I've given you all the information. I'll do the checking. He says, well, I definitely want you to do that. And that's what I do. He sends me drawings. He says, make sure they're right. If you see any cost savings, that's the only part that's hurting the contractors. But you know that
At least you're bidding apples to apples.
apples to apples, and not only
Which
that,
certainly
if
helps.
first thing I asked him is Colonial on this job, well, not this one. I said, is there a chance they can? And I called Travis
Yeah.
or Aaron, and I said, look, Clyde's got this job. Do you want to get take a shot at that?
Yeah.
And they have first
Right.
first choice. They're going to get the last look.
So you know what I was thinking about? Remember we were talking about you being the fixer of things.
Yeah.
Still are.
Yeah.
Still
Good point.
are.
Yeah, you're right. That's a good point, Jamie.
I mean, really, it just goes to show that you're willing to help, wherever you can, and it's
It's
good
fun.
you're staying busy. Like it really is, like keeping something you're passionate about, and it's nice that you said, you know what, I don't want to be tied down.
Right.
This is what I want to do, but I'm not going to sit here and do all the work. You deserve to have some time off.
But going back to what you said about making it fun, when we talked about that.
Yeah.
One thing I used to tell the guys in the beginning, I said, you walk on the job and they're all clowning around. So I get them all in a group. I said, here's the deal, guys. I've been there. I did it. Some of it I invented. Don't think you're fooling me. You're spending
Can't
too
get-
much time
yeah.
clowning around. Here's the rule. You get your work done, then you can clown around
Right.
or slack off a little bit, do whatever. And a lot of them took that. You know, some don't. They try to push the
Push
limits.
the limits. Yeah.
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 And I just tell them, I said, you know, you're only going to get caught because you can't produce what everybody else was. And that's one thing that we did, like back when I was in the trade, and I think when Travis first started, we didn't have subcontractors.
Right.
We did everything
All the
hourly.
work.
Yeah.
Right.
And the labor was suffering. What I say suffering is there were people that had started in the contractors that had started with the subs, and they were getting these numbers, you know, because the guy says, well, your number's about 10, 15% high. You say 10 or 15. So Butch and I started running the numbers, and it was always in the labor. And back when he was doing the residential work, he was using piece workers, but got away from it.
Right. Right.
So we started back. Manor Reyes was our first
Reyes,
employee.
yeah.
He
That's
was
right.
an hourly guy, and when he came to work, he said, "I got these 6 other guys are coming with me." And I said, "Okay."
Yeah.
So it was Donnie Hall's job over in Laurel. I said, "Do you mind if these guys come over and work?" And they worked hourly. And Donnie says, "Can you get more of those guys?
Yeah,
they
yeah,
don't
yeah.
stop working."
And then we had Jack. Remember Jack? I think he was from like, was it not South Africa?
Oh, Jack Mafoman.
Yeah.
I ran into him, by the way.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah.
Dang.
And yeah, he was from Cameroon.
Cameroon, that's what it was. Yeah.
Cameroon.
I remember Jack.
Yeah, that's off the coast of Africa.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And when he came to work, I said, "I want to ask you a question, Jack." I said, "How many wives do you have?" He says, No, that's not me. That's for the royalty. They have all they want. I only want one."
I can only handle one. So let's get into our next section. We have your role in Colonial. So how do you think you've helped grow the company into what it is today?
Well, I think my help in helping it grow was keeping the name of Colonial Electric up at the top. You know, teaching people that came here what my theory is on working for a company. And I've always said, and my dad was the one that told me this, when you work for somebody, you work there like you own the company.
Right.
What would you do to make sure that you had the name, made the money? You were the company that people were trying to catch up to, not one of the companies running in the pack.
And making it not so much a job, but this is your
Yeah.
career. This is,
Yeah,
you
it's
know,
your career. Yeah, it is.
it's your
It
life.
is.
Yeah.
You know, I'll be
absolutely.
honest with you, when I was in high school ready to get out, I never envisioned staying with a company as long as I did, you know. It was just the way back then. It was when the technology part of it was just starting to rise. And I knew people that would leave for 10, 15 cents an hour more.
Right. Right.
I mean, my first raise, I was making $1 an hour as a helper, was 10 cents an hour.
right.
But you know what? That was 70 cents a week.
Right.
You know, that was a loaf of bread
Yeah.
and a half a pint of lunch meat.
Wow. It's amazing how
Things
much
were a bit
it's
simpler
changed.
back then.
Yeah, yeah, I know. It's
Now
like,
it's
wow,
like,
that's
I can get 6 video games
Yeah.
and I
Right.
can get a
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Starbucks
You know?
latte.
well, exactly.
And one thing, and Butch and I both hit it at the same time. We were walking a job, and there was a guy sitting on a bucket
Oh,
doing
shit,
switches and
that's
plugs. He didn't want to bend down or squat to put the plug in. Butch walked over there and kicked the bucket out. Boom, right down.
I've heard this story.
And I said, "Oh my God, this guy's going to be suing us."
Oh my gosh.
But
That's great.
you know, people
That's-
that started the lazy part of it.
Well, that's
Yeah.
one side of it, and then the other side is, and at some point we'll probably do an interview with Zeke.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
Zeke was the guy that
Yeah.
would take, because I remember this from working out in the field. Zeke would take the bucket and set it down, and he'd stand on the bucket, and he wouldn't get back down to move the bucket.
Yeah.
He would shimmy it. 5-gallon plastic, he'd shimmy it to the next spot.
Oh my
And I mean,
gosh.
obviously you can't do those things these
No,
days,
not now,
but I
yeah.
mean, that's the kind of stuff that people that wanted to work
Yeah,
and
they
wanted to
found a way to
excel
do
at,
it.
They found
Yeah,
a way to do it.
found a
yeah,
way.
Yeah. And that's a good. So I remember when Colonial was Colonial, and we did around $3 million a year or so, and we started to grow a little bit. And I remember we had this We somehow got a job with Donahoe. I remember Donahoe. We did a hotel. And it
That was our
awesome.
first $1 million job.
Yes.
Over $1 million.
It was a pretty good sized job. I think Dave Prout did it, and Al
Yep.
obviously was.
I estimated
Where was
that
that?
job on an
It was in
old
Roslyn,
estimate.
Virginia.
Roslyn, Virginia.
And
Okay.
I met a buddy fishing through Mike McGivern, a friend of mine.
Oh, yeah.
John Fenton. And I was like, and he's like, you all do that kind of work? I'm like, oh yeah, we do it.
Yeah,
We do it."
absolutely.
And
Right.
he's like, well, I'll bring you some drawings next time we go fishing and see if you can. So we got the drawings, took it all. But what I'm leading into, so then that led to another job called Bethesda Theater.
Yes.
And I remember we got this job, and it was in like downtown Bethesda, and it was a big job, like really big job. It was probably it's the biggest. It was a big job.
It was. It
And
was
I
a
remember
city
Al
block.
going out there. They dug the hole, and Al came back, and I'm like, what's it look like? What do you think? And I'm probably 20, probably 32,
Yeah.
30 years old. He goes, Travis, that job is really, really big. And I'm like, oh shit, Al's saying it's big. What am I? And I didn't say this. Quick.
Yeah.
I'm thinking,
I was
oh,
worried.
no.
Yeah.
And I could tell. I was like, you know what? He'll figure out a way to get done.
And what happened?
That's
yeah,
what happened. Yeah.
exactly.
There was an incident on that job too. I'll never forget
I
this.
remember this.
David was over there and he was setting the electric. And he kind of got the bucket truck, the crane wedged in there between that and the contractor's trailer. They had an owner's meeting going on that day. And this guy, John Body, comes out and he starts yelling at me. I said, I'm talking to the guy that did it now. He says, he's doing a great job, but every time you come over here, and he was sticking his finger on my chest. I said, John, you touch me again, I will knock your ass out. You don't ever touch me. You can yell, scream, spit on me, but do not touch me.
Yeah.
And the owner
Personal
was
bubble.
looking out the window.
Yeah.
Well, but that wasn't. Is that where you locked the temporary power off of pool?
Yes.
That's the same job, right?
Yeah, yeah.
That's
Oh
what I
my
thought.
gosh, yeah.
I shut the temporary down and locked it off.
Oh my god. Mess with Al.
Nope.
So were there any discussions at the beginning of Colonial of like the trajectory of where you saw this going?
That wasn't until my wife and Jackie and I started a venture. We were doing retail, high-end stationery stores, and we had a bunch of them. Well, the 90s hit, and they just,
Yeah.
we got rid of them all, went through some issues, we got cleaned up, and, I was still going to try to retire, but I knew I couldn't do it. Must have been an act of God, I don't know. But Travis came in the middle, early on, that's when we had it at the office. He says,
At the other
you still,
office.
yeah.
Yep. Out in the warehouse, which became
No,
offices.
it was out no, it was at that office, that's right, that's
Yeah.
right. He says, you still talking about retiring next year? I said, well, he says, look, I want to grow the company, and I need you to stay and help me.
Yeah.
And I was just,
Thank God. Thank you. Yes.
Thank God.
An angel.
And, he says, here's the deal though. I'm thinking, oh God, here we go, Your dad or my dad and you had a lot of things that were just handshakes. They had set up a retirement plan for me. It was actually Travis and I shared in the profits every year. And it was a 50-50. I mean, how could you get anything?
Yeah.
But Butch and I go back a long way as friends. We became friends quickly. We're much alike. We were. We still are. I still think about Butch, and always people would say, "Your brother." I said, "Wait a minute."
Yeah.
And he would say the same thing. No, we're not brothers. But
Just as close as.
Yeah.
But,
Might as well be. Yeah.
one thing he told me, he says, I'm going to tell you now, you have always had my back since you started here, and I always will have your back. And kind of leads to him coming to work here.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's for sure.
The
Yeah.
talk,
Yeah.
as Ashley calls it, the talk.
Yeah.
The talk.
He
What's the talk?
came in one day late, and
Well,
finishing the job.
You finish the story. Let me start the story.
Okay.
I was home from college for a week. My dad goes, and I had worked in the summers for Colonial, and then I went to college, and I swore I'd never be an electrician. I'd never work for my dad.
Yeah.
Didn't work for would not work for Colonial, and went to college and did a landscaping business on my own, and did not work for Colonial. Got out of college, was home a week. I graduated in January, so I was home like from January 5th to 12th.
Right.
And he goes, if you're going to live at home, you need to come start working. I said, well, Dad, it's been a week. I'm looking for a job. It takes a little bit of time. Well, do you want to live here? Yeah. I kind of need to. 'Cause I don't have any other place to live. I have no money.
Right.
So I guess, okay. So he said, just come in 3 days a week. Okay, I'll come in 3 days a week. So come in 3 days a week, and cleaning out trailers and then 3 days turned to 5 days. And I remember Al coming to me and going, I remember a couple things he said. One was, the early bird always gets the worm. So then because I would get up at 7, get there late, and,
Right.
and I wasn't doing what I should have been doing.
Right.
I was immature, and he said that. Then I remember him saying, "You've got a really big opportunity here. He's like, don't screw it up." And I'm like, okay. I didn't know any of that meant at the time.
Right.
But at some point in grading, and then now you can finish your story.
We came in late one day in the evening after working, and he cleaned up in the bathroom. And I was in my little cubicle at the house. I sat in one cubicle, and Kathy sat over at the other. And
And we all stared at each other.
Well, everybody was gone. I said, "Where you been?" He said, "We had to get that job done." And I'm thinking, he finally caught on.
Oh my gosh.
So I said, "Travis, let me ask you a question." I was very calm. I said, "Are you stupid? Have you not realized that this company is here for you?" He said, "I never thought about it."
I didn't.
Right.
I said, "Think of, that scale that you see up on the judge's desk, and it kind of goes like this. With you taking the company, it's whoom,
Yeah.
like this."
Yeah, absolutely.
And Butch came to me I guess it was about a week or so after that. He says, "Travis is going to stay full time."
Oh my gosh.
I said, "Wow, imagine that."
Yeah. I mean, really, when you're that young too, you really don't know what you're.
So,
I didn't know what I wanted to
Yeah.
do. I knew I didn't want to do that.
Yeah, exactly.
At least that's what I thought.
but you had been through the hard part.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think Ricky might have had a little bit of your molding there and David went through the same things Daniel didn't as much out in the field though. When you're an owner or a supervisor's child, you get all the brunt of
Right.
anger, and sometimes they just do it to make fun of you.
Yeah. Yeah.
They don't mean to hurt you, but it does sometimes, I think.
Like other your coworkers and things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Joy is sometimes, what does joy mean, right? What's the word joy mean? Well, it means you're happy, right?
Yeah.
Well, sometimes a process to get to the point where you're happy and have joy, you have to enjoy it, and you have to enjoy the hard part of
You
it.
have to go through the grit. Yeah.
Right, the hard part, and
Yeah.
that's true joy. When you're happy from the hard part, and you realize that got me the joy.
Exactly.
And that's
Yeah.
I think anybody that came through construction from way back to. And I don't want to say it's not hard now, because it is. It's still hard.
Yeah.
It's got many challenges, traffic, all this kind of stuff. But it was really hard with the way people treated you from way back to, I'm going to say probably 2010-ish. And then the tides have changed where it's become more professional.
Professional,
and people,
respectful.
you're not calling someone a piece of what or
Yeah.
on a daily basis because
Yeah.
you're trying to round them up or trying to get them to quit. And that's literally what I can remember going on jobs and Ricky McCullough going, "Hey, can you grab that real quick?" And I go up there and go, yeah, what do you need? And I grab it.
Oh my god.
And it's like, "Oh, sorry about that." And it's like, "Okay, yeah, you're sorry, all right."
gosh.
But that
Wow.
was just the way it was.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine.
Well, some of the part with David, I worked for Ricky's father. And we used to do that.
Right.
But one time he was working on, I don't know if you ever heard about this one. They were down on the Parks job.
Right.
Ricky knocked him through a wall.
Oh, yeah, I've heard about that.
Oh, you did hear about that?
What a time you
Like
put
an
them up
actual-
in the ceiling and wouldn't let them down?
Yeah.
All that?
I heard about that. But the best one of them all was David still does, and I'm not a fan of it. He still smokes.
Yeah.
And he was smoking in JR's truck. And JR told him, "Put it out." He says, "No, I got to smoke." JR had the fire extinguisher. He picked it up.
Sprayed him?
Yes, he did. I remember.
He was covered with all. And he's just sitting there like, with a cigarette.
Well, then I think they had to pull over because there was a guy with him named Donnie Balkman that used to work.
Yeah.
That was JR's helper along with David. And JR pulled the van over. Donnie got in and drove. JR went in the back and they started fighting.
David hit him.
Oh my gosh. There was another story I heard where they tied him up to a tree or something like that.
Yeah.
Those are my
That's
favorite
when he
stories.
was young.
Yeah,
He
yeah.
came in when he was like 15,
Yeah.
in the summer.
Oh my gosh, those are my favorite stories. And about David going to, I think it was Taco Bell or something, and instead of buying lunch, he got all the sauces and the sides and made like
It was
a
at Arby's. Jim Bentley, Jim's telling me the story. He says, "He embarrassed me so bad, I had to leave." I said, "Jim."
Oh my
I
god.
can see that too.
Oh, that's incredible. Oh my gosh.
Shit.
Yeah. So clearly some good times.
Oh, for sure.
Good times have been had.
Well, I'll tell you, I used to tell Butch, I said, why are we wasting our time doing electrical contracting? Let's write a book about all that's happened, and we'll get 2 ice cream trucks.
Yeah, there you
and
go.
that was a big thing. Butch would always say, I should just buy an ice cream truck and throw this damn job down.
Oh, my
and
God.
I'd say, we get 2 ice cream trucks, we'll work.
And go on a book tour.
Yeah, there you go.
and we'll go to Florida in the summer.
Yeah, there you go.
Ice cream and books.
Yeah. And you know what's funny is you kind of carried on that legacy when you opened the Tubsies, the
Yeah, you're right,
shaved ice.
the shaved ice stand. You're
I
right.
think a couple people had that.
Yeah,
that
That's a good point. We did.
But I'm serious, there's some stories that you could tell.
We could sit here all day long
Yeah.
and tell stories.
And
Oh,
people,
yeah.
some
I
of the
love
stuff
it.
they say, that happened? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. It's like a sitcom.
Yeah.
I love
Maybe
it.
the next thing is we'll start the history of Colonial book.
Yes, exactly. I think we might have to.
Yeah.
We'll have a
Everybody
full
else
media.
says we're trying to money write the book.
The stories of
Why
Colonial.
not? Okay, so let's talk about the feel of the company. How do you think we differ from other companies? I know we've like really put a big emphasis on family, right?
Yeah.
And like, you know, how we relate to each other and how you might start as an employee, but then ultimately you become a family member. So how do you think that differs from other places?
I would say that the size of Colonial is now, most companies get it, you're just a number.
Yeah.
You know?
Oh yeah.
You're a check that gets written, you know, you come in, punch a clock. I don't think, you don't punch clocks yet.
punch clocks.
Tried it for a while, right,
It
with the
did.
exact
It just
time.
didn't work really
You
well.
know, it's all about trust from both sides. And my feeling is if you work for a company that's watching you punch in, watching you while you work, and
Like
you
Big
know,
Brother. Yeah.
yeah, Big Brother type thing. And I mean, some places it's needed, like
Yeah.
prisons.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I'd say
know,
so.
Right.
Right.
But I've always felt that even when I was in the field, you know, when I got to know Butch, he knew me, I knew him, I played on the softball team. He knew that I was there to help him with the company before I got moved into the positions.
Right.
And he would always ask me, what do you think?
Yeah.
You know, that's big when somebody asks you, especially an owner,
Oh, yeah.
what do you think?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and Travis and I, you know, had some jobs where we had to go to the one, and this is a little story about Travis, was the Whiting Turner. When you jumped up on the desk, remember the guy said something about us, and he went up on the desk, they had tables pushed together, and he was up on top of them, and I said, sit down, calm down.
I do remember that.
I really do think at least most of us have each other's back so much. I mean,
Yeah.
I know
Yeah.
I could come to either one of you guys
Yeah.
with anything that I need ever.
And I can tell you that Butch and I never had an argument, ever. And I think Travis and I had one. And I made him mad. I said something that I probably shouldn't have said. And he said, oh, really? And he walked out. And we didn't talk to one another
Right.
for about 3 days.
Yeah, probably so.
And Travis walked in, and he was the guy to offer and I said, look, you know, I apologize. I should apologize. Let's just to move forward. And never again.
Nope.
Yeah. Yeah.
Never again.
Well-
He always would come to me when something would pop. He'd say, what do you think?
Yeah. Exactly.
And I've asked him, what do you think?
And that means a lot. I
Yeah.
mean, just hearing, like, if I ever come to you guys with an idea and you ask me, well, you know, what do you think about that? Like, oh, you want to know what I think. You want to hear my ideas. You want like,
Sure.
that's really important. And I think it really makes a difference just in how, you know, people feel as employees and
Right.
that whatever they have to say matters. You're not just sitting there typing on a computer doing
Right.
what you're supposed to be doing. You have a difference. So.
And everybody that I talked to, when it come to, or as it got towards the end, I'd do the ride. Travis said, I got a guy for you to ride. Aaron was the first guy.
Yeah.
Then Danny, and a couple other people. You know, you can't learn unless you want to be taught.
Yeah, absolutely.
And one thing, and I learned this from Eddie Oliver. He told me when I went to work there, he did my interview. And he asked me some questions, what is it that you know? And I told him. And for some reason, it was a big commercial job, but I never said, I know how to run pipe. And when it was over, he says, you're hired. I said, that quick, nothing else? He says, no, because you didn't tell me that you knew how to run pipe and it was a commercial job. I said, well, I thought that was just understood. He said, exactly.
Wow. Yeah.
And he said, you remember this. Don't ever be afraid to ask a question because if you get ridiculed, either that person doesn't know himself or he just found out.
Yeah.
And I live by that.
That's actually, it's funny you say that because that's what any person that comes in our office, I'm like, never be afraid to ask. Just ask it.
Yeah.
If you have to ask it 100 times, I would say, well, you know what? Like, if you didn't learn the first time, maybe I wasn't teaching you good enough, you know?
And I told the guys, I said, one part of becoming a good in the supervisory role is you have to not only know electrical, you got to know everything that's going on with the floor guy, the plumber, every other trade, because we interface with everybody, and that's what keeps you on schedule, is keeping up with them.
Right.
That's right.
Exactly.
If you know when you see them start bringing tile in, and you know that the next thing is a crew of people, you better have everything done in the floor ready for it before that group of people get there.
Right, yeah.
And it pays off.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. And I mean, you can just see that in all the success that we've had in our, you know, every single project we've had, you know,
Sure.
it's all that working together with all the other trades and making it work.
And I can tell you, and I heard this from people from Donahoe, Harkins, and plenty of other contractors. They said, you know, everybody's got their weak points. And I said, look, you know, we got weak points, but we want to work on them. He says, no. What I'm saying is you are always there at the end and finish on time. We had one job we had 200 men working on.
Oh my gosh,
The theater.
Yep.
We had 200 electricians on the job.
Well, like we did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I was like,
we had them coming from all over
wait,
the United
what?
States.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
That was Snowden Parkway United Artists.
It was the first 18
Yep.
screen theater that we did, and
In Columbia.
about
Oh my God.
in April, no, not April, it was late April, they shut the job down, the steel was all designed incorrectly.
That's right.
Oh my God.
And the job sat, so we get a call, we got a big meeting on the job, be there, and let us know what it's gonna have, what you're gonna need to get this thing done. This was in late August. To have it done by Christmas Eve.
No, Thanksgiving. Have you open for Thanksgiving? I thought.
No, it's Christmas Eve.
It's Christmas. I knew it was a
Yeah,
holiday.
because the Christmas opening is the biggest opening
right.
in theaters back then. So we worked it all up, and Butch and I said, well, it looks to me like it's going to be about 200,000. He said, bullshit. You know, that was his biggest thing.
Yeah.
When you got on there, he said, that computer's wrong.
Yeah.
I was like,
I said, okay, I just put the numbers in. It's 250. Let's put 20% on there. We put 20% on there. I said, I hope it goes through. That'd be nice. We got it. Everybody, they were in agreement because they would have lost a lot of money.
Right.
Christmas Eve at 11:45 in the morning, we were up. All the main trades had to go up there to get the final. We had to have there to show the woman. She said, "You're lucky because I was leaving here at 11:50 for the holiday."
Right. Oh my gosh.
Walking out of there, guy said, "We were going to open anyway."
I remember that.
Everybody said, "You guys have always been there to finish."
Yeah, so that kind of leads into my next question about like the general contractors. How do you feel like you've nurtured these relationships and grown these relationships with some of our GCs, such as like Donahoe, like you were saying, or Harkins? Like you said, that's a big part is, you know, we finish the job. So
Right.
what are other ways you think that has helped nurture those relationships?
I mean, we've grown a lot to where we've learned how to stay up with it. And I think Travis and I talked about it, and I instituted it on the job. I said, our job, here's what we're going to do. We are going to set the pace. We're going to be the pace setters on the job, and they're going to have to catch us.
Right.
And I said, what do you mean? I said, what I mean, if you're scheduled to have a section trimmed out, if they don't have it painted or drywall up, trim it out. And at first we got a little pushback from the generals. And I said, you want us there. Nobody else is setting the trade. Use us. I mean, I don't care if we're called the bad guy by the subs.
Yeah.
You know,
Whatever.
they'll thank us when they get done and they get paid all their money instead of getting back charged.
Exactly.
And it did.
Yeah.
It worked.
Right.
It worked.
Right. Do you have any connections still with a lot of these different GCs
I do.
people you've worked with?
I do.
Yeah. Namely.
Tim Loftus,
Okay.
we were enemies.
Oh, really?
Oh my God, we were enemies. And one thing that added fuel to the fire was that chuck rig.
Jockey.
Oh, Chuck.
Old Charles.
It was the Bethesda
Bethesda Theater. Yep.
Theater. We were setting traps to catch rats.
I remember this. Yeah.
And Tim comes down and he says, "What are you doing?" He said, "Oh, we're just getting some lunch ready." And Tim said something to him, and Chuck said, "What exactly do you do?" He says, "You might want to go get another job to do something else." He says, "Well, actually, I'm the vice president." He had just gotten a promotion.
Yeah.
Oh my
I
God.
got a call from Tim that day. He says, "I like Chuck." He says, "Tell him, please, on the job in front of everybody, tone it down."
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So not only GCs have you had important relationships, right? A lot of our vendors as well.
Yeah.
Why do you think it's important to keep these relationships?
For me to keep them,
Or for us as a company
as a
and
company,
you, yeah.
you have to have a relationship. It's something you got to get to know the people, not just a guy that comes in and he wants to do the takeoff and then leave. I don't expect them to stay around, but I expect you make a relationship, and there comes times in a relationship where one side needs help from the other.
Right. And you build that trust.
You build that trust.
Yeah.
Well, you go from a relationship to a partnership, and the
Right.
partnership is what develops as a from a relationship where you can make deals when one person's like, hey, look, I made a mistake on this job. Can you help me?
Exactly.
And a partner goes, yeah, we can help.
Yeah.
And vice versa.
And what you do is you say, look, you helped me on this last job. Got a little bit of fat in here. Your price looks good, but it's a little high. But remember back when?
Yeah.
We're good on that now.
Yeah, exactly.
Greasing each other's palms.
Well, I was going to say, you scratch my back, I scratch
that's
yours.
right.
Yeah.
And in a professional
Right.
way,
Absolutely.
not doing anything
Like
below,
side thing. Yeah.
nothing like that.
No,
But just helping helping another human being that you have
Exactly.
a partnership with.
Yeah.
Right. A lot of the
absolutely.
guys, like Jim White for one, when he first started working was for Commerce Electric. He was a truck driver, delivery guy. He came out on a job one day and we're trying to pull feeders in the mud. And he comes over and he starts talking. I said, "Oh, Jim, hold off, I'm doing this right now." He says, "Well, I gotta get out of here. I got this reel of wire." And he was parked up on the edge, you couldn't get in, it was muddy as heck, I said, "Best thing I can tell you, if you need to get in there, roll it in." So about 30 minutes later, one of the guys was on a job, he says, "Look at that." And he's rolling across the mud, he's slipping and falling. So I said, "Go over, take the crew over there and help him get it in." So the guy goes around back, it's a backhoe, goes over,
Oh my
takes
gosh.
it up, takes it up. And Jim said, "He could have done that in the beginning." I said, "Yeah, I could have if you asked me."
Right, exactly. Oh my God. Love
But
it.
we became good friends, and I like friendship, but I don't let it interfere.
Right.
And I would tell everybody in the beginning, and I learned this from his dad: you buy hard in the beginning. When it comes time to change orders or whatnot, you let them make their money. If they make
And
money,
you be fair. And that's
Yeah, you be
Yeah,
fair. You be
That's
fair.
right,
Yeah. Right. So something I kind of wanted to get into, and we kind of touched on it earlier. What was it like to make deals before computers? Like, how has the industry changed so much since you started?
I would say that when we started doing the bigger jobs, especially high rises, I mean, you had a engineer's rule, an architectural rule, you had a calculator, and you did everything by hand. There was no drawing coordination, nothing like that. And they didn't even put the electrical specialty items onto architecturals like they do now, where they show them interface with the cabinetry and everything like that. We would make boxes like about this big, and we would put fluorescent lights inside of them, and it would shine up through one where you could overlay the next drawing over top of it.
Oh my
Light
gosh.
box,
Wow.
And the
wow.
reason we did that is you
About
could
those
get
guys,
vellum,
Wow.
you could get vellum drawings, that's like clear plastic. Of course, Butch says, "I'm not paying all that damn money to get it."
I remember
It was
those
like
days for sure.
$20 a page
Wow.
Yeah.
per vellum.
Yeah.
And I said, no, I understand. I said, but look, we're gonna need, and I told him, here's what we could do. It was Spider came up with the idea.
Yep, that's. I think it was at Collington Plaza, wasn't it? Was it Collington?
Probably on that one, yeah. He came up with the idea. I said, let's do it. I mean, nowadays it'd be easy. You just throw a roll of LED in there and
Boom, you're done.
you're done. But I mean, you had to do all that.
Yeah.
You had to improvise,
Right.
and it was tough. And I would take drawings home. I'd finish eating dinner and I'd go work on the drawings for 2 or 3 hours a night to get everything laid out. I mean, now they got a thing, you stand there with a pole with the GPS and it picks it up and said, oh, there's where the box goes.
Right.
One guy can do the work of 5 laying out the slabs.
Yeah.
But I think Al hit on something really important. Is he mentioned he'd go home from work, eat dinner, and he'd go back and do a couple hours on drawings.
Right.
And that's something that if you want to get ahead in this world, whether it's electrical or plumbing or lawyer or whatever it is, you can't expect to work from 8 to 5 or 9 to 5 or whatever it is. You can do that and have a decent life.
Yeah.
But if you want to get ahead, it takes that extra effort where it's just like being a basketball player and you're practicing with your team, but then you go home and you practice an hour more. It's the same thing with this, and Al said it great, that he would go home and do extra work.
I think that makes the difference between like the standard, right? You come here, you do your job.
Yeah.
It's pretty standard, but like what makes you excellent is putting in those extra hours, as both of you have done, and obviously makes a huge difference. We're doing pretty well around here, so I think those extra hours definitely showed.
And one thing I want to add to that is Jackie put up with it.
Yeah.
Well, you got to have
For money.
support. You got to have support from your spouse, whoever it is, has to support that you're going to do that, and you're doing it for the betterment of the company and your family.
And your family, right? Absolutely.
We did the one, I forget what job it was now, but it was a big job, where we ended up working 38 or 39 hours straight through. And
Wow.
I didn't have phones then.
Yeah.
I had a pager and I kept getting paid from Jackie.
Yeah.
So I finally got it early that morning as the sun was coming up and we're still working. And she said, "What the hell are you doing?" Believe it or not, I'm on the job. "Well, when are you coming home?" Sue's worried to death about spiders. He with you? I said, "Of course he is."
Yeah.
That's when we got stuck in the elevator.
Oh, I do.
With Ray Pryor running up and down the stairways trying to get us in. It was an 18-story building, and we were testing the fire alarm at 3 o'clock in the morning, and it shut down the elevators.
Oh my God, I will.
And I called.
There's anxiety about that.
Yes,
yeah.
oh my
I picked
God.
up the phone and it was automatic dial. "Yeah, this is so and so." I said, "You're getting a signal on the elevators. Ignore it. But what happens if the fire department comes? Do they open it with the key?" "No, they just hammer." And these things were bronze doors. I said, "Don't do it. Don't do it."
Yeah.
Well, did you ever meet Ray Pryor?
No.
Trip. He's a trip.
Yeah.
He was working with us, and he was not in there, and he was running from the basement to the penthouse because the elevators weren't working. And he finally came, and we could hear him out there. He says, "I'm getting lightheaded." He stuck a broom inside, and there's a lock that they make a key. You just do it. And he was jamming it up in there, and he hit it, and the doors went. I said, "Go to your trucks and go home. I think the fire department's
Oh my
coming."
God, I'm telling you, it really does sound like a sitcom. I love your stories are incredible. This has made my morning really. That's
It
hysterical.
has been fun.
Yeah.
Fun. It just has. It's been
Depends on
fun.
your perspective.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I love it. So where do you foresee the industry going? So we talked about the past. What's going on in the future, do you think?
I mean, AI is going to play a part in it, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm really
Scary,
sure.
yeah.
The pre-wires, are you doing those now?
We're doing, yes, we are not, we're probably 25% of our jobs, 20% of our jobs will
And they're
be
working?
prefab. Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It's,
I'm sure there's
there's
sticking
glitches
points
and
that you work
it's
through.
not perfect, but it's the things you can't control, it helps you control those.
Yeah.
And waste, mistakes, theft.
Yeah.
It helps control all that because it's a kit and the kit's the kit and
Yeah.
you can't really take from the kit.
Yeah.
So it really does with risk and such. It's a huge
Are
improvement.
you full-blown panels and everything
Yeah.
where they do the panel walls? Really?
No, not panel walls. No.
Where they put this, well, they come out in studs and you just stand them up. And
We're getting the box, like the
Getting to
panel.
that point.
You know,
Yeah,
they give them
okay.
the panel, they put the breakers in, they take the whips off of it with the home
Gotcha.
runs. We stick that in the wall, get the whips through, and then each box, so receptacle has a wire going this way,
Right.
and then a connection going that way, and you basically plug and play.
Now, when you plug in, do you leave those in the wall?
Yep.
Yeah, because they're approved now.
Yeah.
That
Yep.
came out in.
Yeah, and the receptacles and switches are already in the boxes
Right.
with the cover on
and
there.
it's got a metal cover, so
Yeah.
they can't cut it with.
So the only thing you got to do is when you trim out is put plates on, put up fixtures obviously,
Yeah.
and smoke detectors and disconnects and
The
that's
only
it.
Yeah.
drawback
Wow.
in the beginning was of course, it was a new type of system, and we didn't have a lot of subs back then. I think we might have had 3 or 4. Maynard was our primary one. He said he did a couple jobs and it takes more time because there were so many mistakes.
Yeah.
And evidently it's worked through that.
It's the time part of it, it saves if you're set up right and efficiently doing it. Meaning that you have a plan and certain people are good at that and certain people aren't. It's the ones that do good at that are the same ones that do good at that. But if you have that plan and you develop a crew, by the time they're halfway through it, the efficiency picks up.
Right.
The key is, as we do it more and more, it becomes more of a staple than it does kind of a knot.
Right.
The crews will be set up to do that, and it'll be much more efficient. And then the labor will start to become close. I mean, right now, if you do piece versus this, it's piece is probably this much better, and it's getting like this. And at some point, it'll probably get about there. It'll never go like this.
Like
Well, you're at the point you need to hire Ed back to bring that on.
Yeah.
Is there a particular project you work on that you would have done things differently? One specific one in mind?
I can think of one.
And I would say none because we got them done.
Sibley?
Yeah.
We would have done Sibley different.
Well, we'd have done it different.
Yeah.
But you know what? I looked at what we had to work with.
But that's
And
yes.
you made it work.
Yeah.
But that's
Yeah.
we made it work and we got through it. But we would have probably put much more of our own men on there, done it with a different sub.
Well, we wouldn't have done it with a sub, I would have said.
Or wouldn't have done it with a sub.
Because it was a hospital.
Yep.
And we wouldn't have, the other thing would have been, we'd have done it all in pipe.
Yeah.
And just done widths down, drops.
Yep.
We should have done that.
That was
Okay.
a learning experience and
But-
a tough one.
Yeah.
An
I
expensive
think
one.
that was one of the first jobs that we lost
Yep,
money.
it was.
But a learning experience, I'm sure you'll never,
Well, it wasn't a learning experience where we did anything more than the company
Yeah.
because we swore off of
Yeah,
them.
we're not doing hospitals no more. so
Yeah,
we're
yeah.
sitting
Well, there you go. Well, that's exactly
Yeah, we
right.
learned not to do
Learn we're
those.
not doing
But you know what? I
But we
would
could
do
do
a
it.
hospital because
Yeah.
I know you got to get everything jammed up.
Now we know.
Yes, yes.
It was like the theater.
Yeah,
We didn't make money on that. I think we were close.
close, but we did not.
We did not. But the next one we made, we had everything done.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like it's those specific first projects. It's like, okay, maybe we
In
didn't make
that
as much, but it's
instance-
the next
In
year,
that
the next
instance,
piece of
because
practice.
whether it's 12, 18, or 24 theaters, it's identical. It's just got a different facade
Right.
on it, and you got different counts.
Right, right.
Once
But
you
pretty
know
much-
that, you know, and who comes in and does all the connections, you know what you have
Well,
to
there's
have
a
ready.
template there now that you have.
Exactly.
Yeah. Let's talk about how does it make you feel that people here still reach out to you and depend on you for advice?
I mean, it's definitely satisfying because it's not because I'm not saying you need me. It's because I get to talk to people that I
Oh, yeah.
worked with.
That you're friends with.
Yeah.
Friendship.
That's the bottom
Yeah.
line.
Friendship,
That's the
yeah.
biggest
There's not a
thing.
person that I don't like at this
Yeah,
company.
yeah.
You
I'd
know?
have to agree.
I think I'm a big part of a lot of people here, as is Travis. I mean, he's brought a lot of his friends to the company.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, everybody that worked here, everybody's got weaknesses.
Mm-hmm.
I had weaknesses. I had a temper.
Yeah,
You know, I'm sorry, but I do.
Yeah.
You know, because I want it right.
right.
You know, but you know what? I can laugh with the rest of them
Mm-hmm.
when something's funny. And I'll tell you, do you remember Steve Boston?
I mean, I know the name, but no, I don't really.
We were down at Pinckney Street back in that area,
Okay.
or Oberry Court. It was back
Yeah,
behind
yeah,
there.
yeah.
And we were up on I guess it was about the 8th floor, and I was kind of kneeling and over top looking at a drawing. Well, there was a pile of chalk dust right here. Steve Boston comes walking up there with a piece of metal stud, and he hits down on it and goes, boom, right up on my face. And I looked up at him, and the smile went. I got up, and he took off running. Well, the studs were up between the floor. I didn't give a shit. I ran through the wall, and when he got to the end where the cinder block was, he wasn't going any farther. I just had to cut him off.
Oh, my God.
And I grabbed. Steve was always only about that tall. I mean, fabulous musician.
Yeah.
Great singer, the whole thing. I had him. He said, "Al, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." I said, "That's all I wanted to hear," and I
Yeah,
said
you're gonna
it.
set him back down. Yeah. I love it. Your stories are incredible. They really are. I mean, this is.
How can you not like that?
Right.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
And I can say one thing. whenever I needed the guys to do that extra step or work the overtime, you know, I said, you're getting paid for it. We're not asking you. We know it, we'll do it. And they did it. No questions asked. No questions asked.
Teamwork.
Yep.
Yeah. So our next topic is going to be advice for up and coming electricians. So we kind of touched on this earlier about some, good pieces of advice that you've received. But what advice can you give to, people up and coming in the industry?
Just a kid that's coming out of high school or
Yeah.
something?
Coming out of high school or even just thinking about it. What's some good advice you have?
Well, my advice is, and I learned this from Butch, when the trade started to change to the high tech, he said they're always going to need the nuts and bolts.
Yeah.
Makes sense. However, if your dad was here today, do you think we could have changed him to the high tech, or would he still have it? Knowing Butch.
He still have his pen and paper.
Exactly. He used to carry that pad. He took notes.
Doing
Yeah.
deals on napkins.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
But, the thing is, yes, you're going to have the nuts and bolts. You can do both. You can intermingle them,
And you really have to do both these days.
but I'm sure there's still specialists out there.
There is. There's niches.
But if you do intermingle, do both, you're going to make more money. You'll be more in demand.
Yeah.
Who would you recommend someone talk to if they're having a hard time reaching their goals, or, who is somebody that they could look up to?
Here.
Yeah. This
I
guy.
think there's a lot of people here that
Oh yeah. I mean,
certainly Al, Aaron,
I told him I'll always be Colonial Electric person.
that's for sure.
Call me. I get a lot of calls from the guys. I do.
Yeah.
Just to talk. They'll ask me questions. I answer them. I don't mind doing that.
Yeah.
I mean, it gives me something to do. It's either that or I'm watching some new show on TV.
But
Or I go out.
But go back to who to call. I mean, I could name 20 people here,
easily.
still here.
Yeah.
Jr., Robert, Terry. I mean, it just.
Chuck.
I mean, there's so much knowledge and experience here
Sure.
that you just have to ask.
Yeah, yeah. And
That's
I'm
all.
sure anyone's willing to
Anyone's
step up
willing
and
to
help.
And there's
That's
new
right.
people that are here too.
Yep.
Yeah.
Kenny Holt, he's got a lot of knowledge. Patrick Owens has got a lot of knowledge. There's quite a few. And you take some of the younger guys, like a Travis Jackson, even though he's young,
Yeah.
he's been doing it for how many years now?
Yeah.
15 or 20?
I mean,
His whole life, pretty much. Yeah.
So he's got a wealth of knowledge too and experience.
What about people outside of our company, like within the industry, who have, people that, different companies, people who they can look to get some advice?
My go-to guy was Billy
Billy.
Eden.
Yeah.
Billy.
Yeah. He was
And he
the
was,
guy.
tell everybody who Bill Eaton
Yeah.
was.
He originally started working for GE Supply. Bill's dad was one of the high guys in GE.
Okay.
The light bulb people and all the entire electrical thing. Bill went to work for them. Then he went to work for Jesco, which is GE Supply Company. And he migrated around. He worked for Dorman Electric, who was a big, privately owned, family-owned business in Baltimore City. And Bill had the what do I want to say, the forthwith to start doing international sales. And they would make up, like, if they needed a starter control panel, they would make it up in their warehouse, supply all the equipment, have it all bolted together and wired inside, and send it out to like Abu Dhabi or wherever. They got really big at it. And Bill was the type of guy, believe it or not, he'd come in and I'd say, Bill, what kind of price can you give me on this job? And jokingly, he'd take the plans and go, 250,000 for the fixtures, 110 for the gear. A couple times, I looked at him the first time. I said, seriously? He said, price it up. Let me know.
Did it come pretty close?
It was close. He'd
Yeah.
been to another place,
Yeah.
and,
Wow.
But Bill was that type of guy. He was fun to deal with. And if you needed to cut a job to get it, he was the guy.
What do you
Bob
think?
Harrell was another one.
And where's he from?
He was, Well, Bob got his start. He worked for an agency, a rep agency. That's how it works. You got the tiers. You got the rep agency, the supplier, and then the user. And there was a young lady that worked at Dorn Electric. I can't remember her last name, but her first name was LaRue. And Bob and LaRue had quite a bit of age difference. And they met, and they lived together for a long time. I don't even know if they ever got married.
I think they did get married.
They finally did?
Yeah.
But I remember when I worked for McCullough Electric before I came here, she was a salesman that would come there, and she'd drive up in this black VW Beetle. She was a hippie. And Bob was not a hippie, but he was kind of laid back.
Opposites attract.
I remember Bob Earl came into the office when we were on Defense Highway, the house, and him and my dad and you were all good friends. And he came in. This was in my period where I was not really sure what I wanted to do, and I remember him saying, "Travis, you got the whole world at your fingertips." And I was like, "What the hell are you talking about, man?"
What does that even mean?
And once again, as you think back on these things, and I remember him saying that. He was right. I mean, I just had an opportunity, but what he meant was I had a hell of an opportunity, and I wasn't taking advantage of it.
Well, sometimes you just got to see it for yourself, or see the other side and say like, oh, you know what, this seems like a better opportunity for me, or whatever.
But you think back to why does that stick with me? Because I didn't know at the time, but he did. So guess what I'm getting at is all the young people that hopefully watch this will go, yeah, I mean, when so-and-so told me that, maybe I should listen to that guy. Because I'm not saying that the elders are always right, but there's a reason that they know what they know from experience. And,
right.
If you take that recommendation or that suggestion or advice and think about it, at least you don't always have to do it, but at least think about it. It generally steers you in the right direction.
Well, there's also a reason why they're saying it,
and
right?
There's a reason why they're saying
People aren't just giving you advice just to talk at you.
Right.
Like there's usually a reason behind it.
And one thing I would like to say is, from my end, not being an electrician, but going to work for a company that allowed me to get into the position that I ended up retiring in, Butch Katsky was the man that you talked to about pricing jobs, negotiating, and everything. He knew what it took to get that. And it started out, he used to always tell people, he told me this when I really got to know him. He says, I used to do houses for Levitt for $365 each, and that included fixtures.
Oh my God.
There's a story that went around Colonial. This wasn't about Butch, but it was about his father, and it was your dad's cousin, Johnny Perry. They were working on a job, and there was material laying all over the floor, and Clayton goes down his pocket, pulls a handful of change, and says, I'll throw my money in with all that waste too. Johnny Perry went over and picked up the money, and Clayton said, Johnny, aren't you going to pick up the wire nuts? He said, I can't buy lunch with those wires. And Johnny was
that's a true story.
Johnny was the type of guy, we were working in Crownsville, another story about him, and I hear this guy going, wahooey, wahooey. And then I walk over and I looked up, and he's up on top of a wall, and he says, from the deepest, darkest jungles of Crownsville Hospital comes the wahooey. He never changed the tone. I never saw him get upset.
Yeah.
Him and Butch they grew up together.
Okay.
They were pals.
Okay.
They were pals. But I think one thing, and I was kind of alluding to it to Jamie, that I think the one thing that really got you and I together, unfortunately, was when your dad had his first heart attack.
Oh, for sure. Yep.
And, we got the calls, as I explained to you, that, what's going to happen now? And we talked, and I talked to Kathy and Travis, and I said, why don't you let me run point? Here's where you get your chance. Come in, and we'll do it all together. And I made that explicit, that it was Joanne, Travis, myself, and Kathy, and we'll keep everything going. And when Kathy explained, I think your mother was involved. They called. I told you they called. It was Joanne too. And we got calls. I got calls back, as I told Jamie, and they said we're in.
Yep. Yep.
And we never missed a beat. And that's basically when Travis took over.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was what we call a life-changing event.
Sure. Yeah.
For especially for me, because it changed the trajectory of my life.
Well, exactly.
In a I'll say in a good way, just a really, that was a hard situation that, ended up being okay. And then,
Well, sometimes most times they feel like a traumatic event.
Yeah.
Really
Well,
brings
the
everybody
last-
together,
the-
and it makes you
Yep.
get your shit together.
Yeah, that's right.
You
That's
know,
right.
like you have no choice. It's either
Exactly right.
you sink or swim.
But the last time when I got the call from Jimmy Nichols, sorry. He meant a lot to me, really did.
Yeah.
That's why I said that I'll always be Colonial if you need me.
Family forever. And honestly, I know that you meant just as much to him as he meant to you.
Oh, for
thanks.
sure.
And it's evident. It's clearly evident.
Yeah.
The
You can tell by the
relationship-
way they bicker.
Yeah. But even now, just your relationship with his son and your whole family,
Yep.
Joanne, everyone knows who Al is.
Yep.
And it's because of that relationship that you built with him.
Let me tell you a little quick story. It didn't have to do with electrical. It had to do with softball. We were coming down. We went to the Nemmer outing. That was the golf outing.
Yep.
And Butch and I were coming down the road. We had to get to Truxton Park. We left up on 270 at the golf course. And we had to be down at Annapolis at Truxton Park for a game. And we had about maybe an hour and 10 minutes to get there. And it was probably an hour and a half easy. We're going down 270, about 75 miles an hour. And Butch puts the car into cruise control, and he gets up out of the seat and he says, "Get in the driver's seat." He jumped in the back and he changed into his uniform. He comes back up in the front. He said, "Make the change again."
Oh my God.
We got down there and they had a thunderstorm that canceled the game.
Oh my God. All of
That
that.
sounds about right.
I was still shaking. I
Yeah,
said,
yeah.
"Butch, did we really need to do it on 270?"
Oh
But my
God.
God, it was just, a lot of people just, I'll be honest with you, people just didn't know Butch. He was a funny guy.
Yeah.
And a pleasure to be around.
Yeah.
I just like being around him.
Yeah.
Not to make this about my dad, but one
No.
funny story about that is I have a friend, John Barnett, and in high school, we spent a lot of time with me, and my dad would be around. For some reason, one day, I wasn't around or something, he had come over, and they got to talking about cars and all this stuff, and he in front of one of my friends the next day, he goes, "You know what, Travis? I like hanging out with your dad. Like hanging out with your dad more like hanging out with you."
think I would come
your
around
dad's
more.
a lot of fun.
Yeah,
I was
yeah.
like, well, I appreciate you saying that.
Oh
but
my
gosh,
gosh.
Yeah.
to Al's point, that's
The company working on the first job was kind of tough because it was a guy that really wasn't taking care of it. But once everything got straightened out, and after that, it became a family.
Yeah.
A full family. And everybody would say, "What do you mean it's family?" The guys, even the guys that were here, "What's his family stuff?" What's his family stuff? When I come out on the job and I catch you guys screwing around, and I bring you in and I talk to you and tell you what the downsides are instead of yelling and screaming and calling you a dumb MFer and all that. They said, "You're right." I said, "Right, I got it a lot from Travis."
Right. Right.
Really, I'll be honest with you. You got a part of your dad and a part of your mom.
Yeah.
And I think they balance
They
each
did.
other
Sure,
out.
both the best parts.
I was
They
very
really
fortunate.
did.
Yeah.
Very
Yeah.
fortunate.
It's such a shame. I hear all these stories about Butch,
Yeah.
and God, I would love to have met him.
Yeah, he
I
was-
may have once when I was younger, I think once, but other than that, I didn't know him at all. But I mean, obviously, hearing these stories now, I feel like I know him.
Yeah.
You were saying, talking about that story with Butch and the softball. Did you guys play softball how long were you guys playing?
Actually, Butch retired out of softball, and then Ricky had a bunch of guys that wanted to play. I think I came to you and asked if
I think so.
you would sponsor the
Yep.
team. And we just needed a third baseman. And I called Butch. I said, "You're back playing softball again."
Yeah, you're in.
Of course, I heard this expletives and all that stuff. I said, "We need you." When I said we need you,
He showed up.
he showed up, and he was definitely the oldest guy on the team. But he enjoyed it.
Yeah,
And
softball was big.
we had some wild people. We had a fellow by the name of Dale Castro. I don't know if you know Dale. He's an icon. Did you go to Southern?
I did not.
Oh.
No.
He was an icon at Southern. I mean, his record still stands, longest field goals, all that stuff. Played for the Cowboys for a little bit.
Oh wow.
But then he went to college at University of Maryland, set a bunch of records there. And a lot of his teammates went on to the pros. He said, I got a bunch of guys I can bring in and I mean, it was like Neil Olkowitz from the Redskins.
Oh my gosh.
I forget a bunch of
On
them.
your team?
On the team, yeah.
Oh my
I mean, this
God.
guy, he could take his arm and probably hit the softball. They were unbelievable. We made it to the state finals.
Wow.
And they had a wild night that night. They threw Ricky off of the balcony into a group of trees.
It was in Frederick too, or Hagerstown.
That was in Hagerstown.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
And his uncle Jimmy worked
Nichols.
here. He got drunk. A bunch of them got drunk. JR.
Oh my God.
I woke up the next morning. My head was
It was pounding.
no, it was very near the commode where I passed out.
Oh.
But and Butch he got up. He says, "You guys helped me up all last night." He says, "You're gonna pay for it that day." So I said, "Oh my God, I had to listen to that." So I got up there the first time at bat. I said, "Please let me hit this home run." I bounced it off the fence. I said, "Didn't bother me."
Yeah.
He said, "Always the funny guy."
Oh man. Oh, that's awesome.
But it was, you know.
The softball was a big part of Colonial in the early days.
Yes.
Yeah, I did not know that.
It
What
was.
was your team name?
Colonial.
Colonial.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Blue and gold. That's where the blue and gold came from.
Oh,
And
really?
They had like the old satin starter jacket.
I got one. I was thinking about wearing
You
it.
should have worn that thing. The old Colonial, yep.
I got this one instead.
I had no idea.
Yeah, that's a good one.
That's
Yeah.
amazing. I had no idea.
It was huge, and I mean, they were part of the Old South. Butch was a major part of Old
Yeah.
South Country Club as
Right,
well,
right.
as was Billy Cheney and Gilbert Hardesty. And they had the Old South Men's Club, and they would travel around and play golf together. I mean, and I always used to kid Butch. I said, "How do you all get together, you bunch of redneck, bent overall wearing golfers out there?" And he said, "Ah, you're funny."
Yeah. Oh my God.
But it ended up, they put together the deal. They formed the Old South Country Club, built it, and 25 years. And
No, now you're talking.
no, it was 25 years that it
Yeah.
lasted.
Oh yeah.
You and your mom are part of the legacy of the Cannon Club now. So, and they kept the cannon in your dad's memory.
Yeah.
I got to do the speech.
Yeah. Yes.
It was after he passed. And, you know, Butch meant a lot to the club.
Yeah.
Butch was a down-to-earth person,
Right.
For
you
sure.
know?
Yeah.
Money didn't matter to him.
Yeah.
It really didn't.
No.
He had his little perks that he wanted, his cars,
Yeah.
his little Christmas houses.
Yep.
You still have them?
My mom does.
Yeah.
Yeah, she still has
He
them.
was a fanatic. He'd say, "Joanne, we got to get out of here and go to the flea market. I got to get that house."
Yeah.
Wait, that's so
I'm
sweet.
serious.
You're
That
right.
is so
You're right about
sweet.
that. That is for
So
sure
is
true.
that where you get your Christmas?
Yeah, for sure.
Christmas?
I got it from my
He
dad.
had
My
Christmas spirit,
Yeah.
believe me.
All right. Well, how about we get into some rapid fire questions?
Okay.
What's your favorite project that you worked on?
I would say my first job
Your first job?
that I did as a superintendent was the sailboat bank at Annapolis, Parole Town. Well, it's Parole Town Center now.
Yeah.
And if you notice, it looks like 4 sailboats converging on one another.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Inside of there, if you've ever been in, I don't know if you have, but it looks like the ceiling looks like that, but it's all recessed and it was all poured concrete. It looks like waffles.
Oh my gosh.
And in the center of every other one is a light.
I bet it's
And it-
beautiful.
And the reason the sails are up there, the architect, Frank Gant, he was a wild architect. He did some wild. He had those supposedly positioned so they would never have to put shades or curtains on the windows. At any point, it would block the sun.
Wow.
That's neat.
That is impressive.
I did not know that.
Who was the most likely to crack a joke in a meeting?
Crack a joke.
Yeah. Lighten the mood.
I would say, other than me,
Yeah.
Chuck
other than
Rigg.
you.
Chuck Rigg, without a doubt.
I can see that.
And his jokes, as you know, are not like
They're drier than,
the Sahara Desert.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yeah.
and he doesn't miss a beat.
No, he
that is
doesn't.
true.
Yeah, Chuck Rigg, without a doubt.
Actually, I don't have this question written, but what's your favorite holiday?
My favorite holiday is Christmas.
Yeah.
It really is.
And would you say this is your favorite, like, colonial tradition that we do? Or do
Oh,
you
without
have-
a doubt.
Yeah.
That's
Me
why
too.
Christmas is my favorite holiday.
Me too. Me
Yeah.
too. We really have a blast.
Well, is there anything you'd like to touch base on today that we haven't?
Like I told you, it wouldn't, if it wasn't for Butch, Joanne, and this young man, I mean, I got everything I need.
For sure.
And I'm very appreciative. Like I said, I'd come back if I was back up here. I would.
Oh, I know you would.
Well, we'd love to have you.
Yep.
I'd
Yeah.
like to work with you for more than, I think I was with you for maybe 2 months, 3
Yeah.
months.
Yeah,
And then,
Yeah.
well, I appreciate you so much for sitting here and talking to
I
us.
enjoyed it. It
I got-
brought back good memories.
I got so much out of this, you have no idea. Like, I really did. So I appreciate you coming up with this idea
Absolutely.
for us, and, I look forward to doing some more.
We're
And
gonna
I
do,
can't-
we're gonna do a bunch more.
One thing
Okay.
I'd like you to do for me, find out where the goose came from.